What's up, Fizz Spectral Throw enthusiasts? As promised, here's a crafting video for all the gear that I have in my Fizz Spectral Throw Impale build. Alright, so first we're going to go over our sword crafting, and we're going to talk about bases really quick. The two bases that we want to focus on are the spiraled foil and the jeweled foil. They have exactly the same base stat, which is 1.6 attacks per second and 5.5% base crit, but the jeweled foil has slightly higher physical damage per second, so it's definitely the better of the two. However, both of the items are very good, and both are good starting points for crafting your sword. Aside from those, I wouldn't really recommend a whole lot of the other ones because you're going to be sacrificing too much, including the implicit on some of these, to use that sword. So for swords, definitely spiraled or jeweled foil are the way to go. Once you have decided what base you want to go with, you're going to have to look for a fractured version. This is the easiest way to do it because rolling triple fizz prefixes are not fun at all. So you have two choices. You can either go with the hybrid fizz accuracy rating, or you can go with the standard percent fizz fracture. In terms of crafting the item, the hybrid one is definitely gonna add some extra stress on your wallet for crafting, whereas the percent fizz, let's get rid of the hybrid fracture and let's put on a percent fizz. So if you take a look at the tier differences here, for tier 1 we're at 179 on the top end, and for tier 3 we're at 154. That means if you don't roll a tier 1 and you instead roll a T3, you're missing out on 25% fizz damage. However, with the hybrid one, at the exact same weighting, tier 3 is 64 on the top end and 79 on the tier 1 top end. So you'd only be losing out on 15% if you roll into a T3. So I do think that having the percent fizz fracture on it is overall better if you're trying to craft a better item. There are some upsides to having the fizz and accuracy fracture instead, but I won't go too far into those. I would definitely just recommend you stick with the regular percent fizz fracture. So we start off crafting this by using the essences of contempt at tier 1, and you're going to want to just hit those until you have either two good suffixes and an open prefix, or you roll into your hybrid fizz percent fizz accuracy roll. So here we have a T6. That's definitely not acceptable, so we'd keep going. And let's just say, we're crafting. I don't want to spend too much time spamming that button, so let's just say you roll into a T3. So we have a T3 and we have a bunch of other garbage on the suffixes, which doesn't really matter. For the first sword, we're going to craft the budget version. So our budget version is just going to be multi-modding. So we would go to our bench, we would craft prefixes cannot be changed, and we would scour. At this point, you can use a divine orb if you'd like to get some better prefixes. I wouldn't unless we had a really good percent roll here. But if you want to, this is the step you do it in to divine stuff up a little bit. But that's going to be something for the higher investment version and not so much the multi-mod version. So now for another two divines, we would can have up to 3 crafted modifiers, and then we would go with attack speed and crit chance. So we have our attack speed here, we have our crit chance, and that would put us at a 537 PDPS weapon, which is reasonable for a starting point for this build for sure. It's definitely going to last you a while until you can afford to craft something better, and we'll go over crafting the higher investment version now. So let's go back to this stage, and let's say, if you're putting more money into it, you're going to be rolling for like T2 or T1. Let's say you hit the T1. We'll put our garbage back on there for suffixes. We'll just go like Dex, and we'll say fire res or whatever. It doesn't really matter. So to finish our suffixes, we're going to want to do something a little bit different here. And first, before we do anything, we want to start off by divining. You're going to be divining for a high fizz percent as well as high flat fizz. So let's go. I don't want to spend too much time dividing this. We got 76, 502. All right, here this isn't bad. So we almost have max on the flat and then almost max on the percent. So that's a reasonable place to stop. So now we're going to go into our bench. We're going to craft prefixes cannot be changed again. And you have two choices as to what you want to do here. You can either go with reforge speed with harvest, which is going to be you have worse odds, or you can go with reforge crit, which is going to be slightly harder to finish off since crit multi is not an attack roll, and in order to remove anything else, we might accidentally remove our crit. In this case, it's up to you to decide. For this video, we'll just go with speed, and we're going to harvest reforge speed. So we're looking for T1 attack speed. We ended up getting T2 with a garbage stat. So what we could do in this case is we can craft on cannot roll attack modifiers. And if you look here, our attack speed has an attack tag, and all of our prefixes have an attack tag, but that cold resistance doesn't. So we could just annul, we hit cannot roll attack, so we'd have to craft it again, and this is going to cost you 1 divine per pop. So again, we do it, and we ended up hitting the mod that we wanted to hit. So from here, at this state right here, if you're cool enough with tier 2, great. If you're not, you're going to have to go back into harvest and reforge after you craft prefixes cannot be changed. Before we do that, let's talk about what happens if you fill up your suffixes while you're doing this. And there is a chance for your suffixes to fill up while you're doing this. So let's say we hit that. I'm not going to spam it, but let's say we hit all this. You're kind of boned. Like, you have to annul. There's nothing else that you can really do anymore. You used to be able to just reforge, keep prefixes, but that doesn't exist anymore. So you're basically left at the whim of RNG. So you basically annul, and hopefully you hit a mod that you don't really care about, which is you don't want to hit your prefixes because that can get super expensive. So let's say we hit what we wanted to. Again, we would craft suffixes, or sorry, prefixes cannot be changed. Harvest reforge speed. We didn't get it again. Go same thing. Go again. So let's say we got something better than tier 3, because tier 3 is kind of not a great roll. Let's go tier 2, where we'll go back to tier 2. So what we want to do to finish off the rest of our suffixes here is we're going to want to fill the suffixes. So we go and have up to 3 crafted modifiers, which is 2 divines, and then prefixes cannot be changed, which is 2 divines. And then we're going to head over to Ashling, and we want to turn one of those, hopefully one of these 2, into a veiled mod. It can possibly hit your attack speed, but it can't hit your prefixes. So if it does hit your attack speed, we're back to doing reforge speed. But in this case, hopefully it does not, which it didn't. So we need to unveil this, and before we do that, we're going to craft on damage per charge. Any one of the 3 will work, and that's going to block the other 2 from showing up. So now what we're hoping for is double damage, some form of crit multi, or critical strike chance. And our odds are pretty good, but there is the chance where you don't get it, which is unfortunate, and you'll have to go back to the drawing board for that. But let's say we unveil and we got double damage while focused. If you want to go with that, that's fine. We would take that. You can further divine your weapon if you need to here, and then we would craft on our crit chance. So crit chance, and we're pretty much fine. That's decent. 628 PDPS with double damage while focused is not bad. Optimally, you'll hit maybe, like, when you do the unveil, maybe you'll unveil double damage. In this case, we got really unlucky. So now we are left with doing the same method as before. Cannot roll attack. We annul, hopefully hit that mod, which we did. And then we have to fill up our suffixes again and go back to Ashling. Hopefully we don't hit our attack speed like we did right there. Let's undo that and just go back into it, because we're basically just repeating the same process over and over and over again until we get what we want. So here we do damage per charge again. We're unveiling. All right, we got double damage. So we would take double damage. That's pretty good stat to unveil. And then we would craft our crit chance on there and be done. Optimally, I think the better scenario is you unveil crit chance and you craft on double damage, but both are pretty comparable, so it doesn't really matter. And then you just, keep crafting until you hit your 27% crit chance, and that would be your weapon there. So again, 628 PDPS with 2% attacks per second, 2 attacks per second and 7% base crit is pretty good. That's definitely a really, really good sword, and you're basically done at this point. It still has some room for improvement if you wanted to spend more currency to try to hit T1 attack speed, but That is the high investment version of the sword. Okay, so I'm going to be crafting this in game, so I really only get one shot to do it. So I hope everything works out and I don't have to like pretend with you. But basically, yeah, I went into standard where I have some extra currency, and I rolled a chest with increased effective non-curse auras, as well as a chest with attacks have crit strike chance, and then another hunter mod on it. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna elevate this item here so that we can get the elevated attack crit, and then we're gonna combine it with this item. Now it's very important when you're using your Awakener Orb, it will destroy the first item you click on and then apply that influence to the second item. So the base that you want as your final base, let's say in this case it's Assassin's Garb. However, with the actual craft, we would want to make maybe like a General's Brigandine or some sort of armor evasion hybrid. Let's say that this is that though. So this is the one that we want to end up with in the end, and this is one that we're going to sacrifice. Now you can make the choice whether to buy these from trade if they're a relatively decent price for a hunter piece with two mods on it, one being the one you need and one being the one you don't, or you can roll it yourself. The easiest way to do it with the attack crit is just to go to the crafting station and we'll reforge critical, reforge a rare with the random modifiers, including critical modifier. So we do that until we get our T1 and another. You might in my case, I got it relatively quick. I just ended up spamming some exalts on it because I have a bunch of play money in standard. But we're going to do this here with these. So first we'll be trying to elevate the mod using an Orb of Dominance, and that's going to select one of those two influence mods and increase it. So let's go ahead and do that now. Hopefully it hits the attack crit just so it makes this guide like maybe a little bit better, but maybe it won't. We'll see. So it did in fact hit the crit. So that's what we're looking for on here. And now you can choose whether or not to elevate it. That's totally up to you if you have the disposable currency. But we'll just go ahead and we'll combine these now. So we're destroying the one that we don't want and we're keeping the one that we do. It's going to keep those two modifiers and make sure the item that you're destroying only has one influence modifier. So you don't want two because then it'll 50-50. If you have three, it'll be a 33% chance to get what you want. You basically just want that one. So whether you have to buy it or alt spam or however you go about making that is totally up to you. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to click on the one that we want to destroy. And then we're going to click on the one that we want to move it to. And in this case, our suffixes are good. We got our non-curse auras. We got our elevated hunt mod for extra crit chance. And then we ended up getting a lightning resist roll, which is actually pretty decent. So from here, we're going to want to go over to the crafting bench and we can get our additional curse guaranteed. Basically what we do is we reforge caster and that will 100% apply that extra curse. It could possibly add two more mods to your item, which is kind of annoying because then we're going to have to annul. And if we annul one of our influence mods, we start over. But hopefully that's not the case. The odds are in your favor. The chance of getting three mods is actually pretty low. So what we're going to do here is we're going to craft suffixes cannot be changed. And something else that you can do instead of this is get a wild bristle matron. That is a beastcraft, which will allow you to add a meta mod to your item. And since our suffixes are full, the only meta mod possible to be added to the item is suffixes cannot be changed. So we'll go here, we'll add our suffixes cannot be changed, regardless of how you get that on your item. Then we're going to go over to our hoarder crafting station, and we're going to search for caster. And like I said, it is the only caster modifier. So we hit reforge a rare with random modifiers, including a caster modifier. We go ahead and craft that on there, and we have our additional curse. In this case, we got a life roll, which means that we would drop the point in our tree. That gives us 15% increased life if we have no life mods on our item because we now have a life mod. But if you don't get that, no fear, you can just pick up that node and you don't even have to bother with life. So to finish it off, we're going to go over to our bench here and we're going to craft on avoidance. And we will just craft that until we have a 25%. And in this case, we got the 25% right away. So that is our finished chest. We don't need to do anything else. If you didn't get a life mod, you could always block life and then maybe exalt. I would probably not do that. There is a chance that you can hit the hybrid evasion life thing. You might just want to leave it as it is, or I mean, if you're bold, you can go ahead and try to exalt it, but this is decent regardless, so we can keep that. And that's our mid-tier investment. Our further investment, we could have also used the Orb of Dominance on our Redeemer chest. If we had increased effective non-curse auras in another mod, we could try to elevate the increased effective non-curse auras. So that's another option when it comes to crafting your chest. So this is basically it. Obviously, you'd want to do your quality and stuff like that with your fossils beforehand if you're trying to get 30% quality, because you can't at this point. But I chose not to do that because I have limited resources in standard. So just make sure if you do want to do that, you do that ahead of time. All right, so we'll go over crafting the boots now. So for our boots, we don't need any influence because we want to use eater and searing implicits on that. So we're going to want to just, armor evasion hybrid boots. Um, in our case, we would definitely want something with a suppressed fracture. So if you can get a T1 fracture, if you can afford that, that's fine. If not, a T2 fracture would do, as long as you get the a shield with suppress on the implicit. But let's just say you can afford to grab this 14%er. So we'll start with this, and we regal that to rare. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to roll with some sort of suffix essence, whatever you need, that will be acceptable for the build. Optimally, you'll be using Essence of Loathing so that you can get your chance to avoid ailments, and you'll likely need at least a tier 2 to cap out. So we're going to want to hit it with that. And what we're looking for, actually, we got our first roll. What we're looking for is we're looking for a good resist. So that's a little unethical, but it does happen, and it's really not that low of a chance because our T1 resists don't have super crazy low weighting. So you're going to want to basically hit it with these until you have an acceptable resist on these suffix. So let's say, you're going along, you end up hitting like fire res, T2 fire res. That's good enough. So we have our suffixes finished here. Now it's just a matter of finishing our prefixes. So for our prefixes, we're looking for move speed and life. If you're not lucky enough to roll into move speed while you're using your essences, you can, there's a few ways that you can go about fixing it. The simplest way is by crafting suffixes cannot be changed, or using a wild bristle matron, which is a beastcraft. And as long as you have full suffixes, the only thing that wild bristle matron can possibly roll is suffixes cannot be changed. So if that's cheaper, do that. Otherwise, just craft suffixes cannot be changed for two divines. And then we're going to hit that with a Veiled Chaos Orb. And hopefully your prefixes aren't full. If they are, there's ways that you can fix that, and I'll go over that in 1 second. So from this point where we have our Veiled Prefix modifier, we just want to block a prefix. And in this case, it honestly doesn't matter what you block. I think you're always going to unveil a movement speed as long as one thing is blocked. So we'll block, for instance, like increased evasion rating while focused. So we just craft that on there at the bench. We go to unveil, and we end up getting chill avoidance and move speed. Chill avoidance doesn't matter because we're going to be immune to ailments anyway. So you may want to just sell these boots. Maybe somebody else will find more value in the chill avoidance. And then you go back to the drawing board, do the exact same thing. When we're trying to unveil, we don't need onslaught. We would like to have increased move speed and movement speed if you have not been hit recently. So we ended up getting those here. If you do end up with those, you just craft life on it, and you are done for your affixes. So we would go back into our bench, go down to crafting, hit it with life until we get a 70 roll, and that is the end of our item. You can also exalt it if you'd like to for maybe armor and evasion rating. Here we got a T4 roll. That's totally up to you. You can get some nice armor and evasion if you end up hitting like something good, but it honestly doesn't matter. All right, so let's talk about what happens if we fill our prefixes before we go on to the next step. So if we take a look at our prefixes here, we'll go remove this veiled mod. Let's say we have this, and we'll go ahead and we'll fill up our prefixes with some garbage. If you end up with full prefixes and you need to get rid of something, you don't have to annul in this situation, since boots, chest, and helmet, boots, chest, helmet, and gloves are all an exception to that. What we can do is we can go into our Eldritch currency, and we're going to be using an Eldritch annul. So how this currency works is, depending on which is the dominant influence on the item, will determine whether the prefixes or the suffixes get rolled. If it is a ember as the dominant, the prefixes will get re-rolled. So if we annul, we annulled off a prefix. If it is an ichor that is the dominant, and by dominant they mean the higher tier one. So if let's say we use an ichor and the ichor is dominant, this is going to manipulate our suffixes. So we don't want that in this situation. We don't want to get rid of our suffixes. So we would make sure our searing is dominant. So whether it be using a smaller, smaller ichor or a higher ember, whatever it is, we would make sure that our searing is dominant, which in this case it is. Here we have tier 5 searing and we have tier 6 eater, and we would just annul to make room for our prefix. So again, we would go into our bench and craft suffixes cannot be changed or use the wild bristle matron. Again, we would be hitting with a build chaos orb, and again we would be blocking and then unveiling. So again, we'll just block evasion rating while focused. We unveil, we get move speed. This case we got onslaught, whatever, it doesn't matter. As long as we have a move speed roll, it's honestly fine. And then we craft on our life again, and that is the end of our item. Now the last thing that we have to do to these boots is we have to finish our ailment avoidance as well as our action speed on the implicits. So we go back into Eldritch crafting, and we're going to start off with ichors because we want to make sure that we're rolling for the harder one to get, the one that we're going to have to elevate or bump up a tier basically, and that is our ichor stuff, our Eater of Worlds. So we want this ailment avoidance, but we want it in a slightly higher tier so we don't have to use conflicts too much. So we're going to want to spam that until we get our ailment avoidance, which might take a bit. So I'm just going to force the craft here. We'll go into Eater, and we will go into ailment avoidance. All right, so let's say we were using these ones here, which gives us 19%. What we're going to want to do is we want to bump that up with Orb of Conflict so that it can round out our build. Now, in this case, we're probably going to need, we have 25% from our chest craft. We have 29% from the suffix on our boots. So we have 25, 29, 20%. So we have what, 49% and another 25%. So we have 74%. So we need to get to 26% on our implicit here. So what we're going to want to do is we need to bump that up. And in order to do that, the best way to go about doing that is to use an ember of a higher tier than the one that we have on our item as our ichor mod. So our ichor mod is a tier 5, which is a greater. So we're going to want to use a grand ember. We'll use 1 grand ember, and then we use our Orb of Conflict. And I'm not 100% sure if this is true, but people have said, and there's been like some, I don't know, some Reddit math, and I really don't know how accurate it is, but people have said basically if you use an Orb of Conflict, it prioritizes the one that is a lower tier. So that's why we used our Grand Ember. So we use our Orb of Conflict, and hopefully it bumps up our ailment avoidance, which it did. We do the same thing. We'll grab an exceptional ember. We'll use an exceptional ember on it to make sure that searing mod is higher than our eater mod. And then we Orb of Conflict it one last time, hopefully for the 26%. And that is exactly what we need. We go with a Blessed Orb, we bless that up to 26%, and we are done. Now we just take care of our searing mod, which honestly doesn't matter because unless you're rolling for 5% action speed, you would have to go bump that one up as well, and that just adds a lot more headache to it. So we just spam it with this, and we settle with the 4%. It's fine. So you just continue to spam it, and it might take a little bit. So let's just force this on there. But what you're looking for is action speed. We get action speed. See, our first couple T6, T5 is 4s, and honestly, you really don't want to be spamming a lot of grands. So tier 4 is fine to settle with, and these are our finished product for our boots. And you can choose to exalt it at the end too, because we still have an open prefix, so that's totally up to you. All right, next up we have our rings. As I mentioned in the build video, it's important that we have an open prefix on our rings. So if you'd like to get like a fractured ring or something like that, that's totally up to you. However, one of your rings should definitely be a synthesized ring with vulnerability on hit, unless you can manage to get that on your Tanuahis, which I'm not even sure if they roll that. I haven't seen a pair yet, so as far as our rings go, we would just pick whatever base you want. It doesn't really matter. In this case, I'm going to be using an amethyst because we're lacking a little bit of chaos res. And since we're low on int, and you're likely going to be below what you need for int, we are going to use spiked essences. And you only need to use, I believe it's T2. Let's see what T3 gives us. Yeah, it's T2. So we'd be using T2 essences, and you just try to hit some decent resists. This is not great. It's not terrible, but you're rolling for decent resists and a decent flat life on the prefix with one open prefix, at least one open prefix. So just keep hitting it until you get what you need on your suffixes and one open prefix, and then that's pretty much it. If you do manage to get really good suffixes, but you don't have life, there is an option for you here. You can wild bristle matron or craft on suffixes cannot be changed, and we can go hit it with a veiled chaos orb. Hopefully you don't roll into too many stats, but if you once you get your veiled chaos orb, we would go into our crafting bench. We're going to block mana, and we are going to unveil for life. In this case, we got 3 different flat damage options, so you'd have to go again. You unveil, hopefully you get life, and then you can craft your non-channeling skills, have reduced mana cost on there. You're going to need 7. -7 is what you want, and then you'd go catalyst that. You catalyst that to 15% or more, and that will bump that up to +8, and that's exactly what we need for the build. So that is one way to do your rings yourself, unless you want to just buy rings. You basically need int, and then you just want resist. You could also get maybe I think it's Redeemer, whatever the crit multi one is. If you have more resists than you actually need, or maybe you have more int than you need, you could go and you could get let's check it out here. Create new item, jewellery ring. We'll just grab whatever ring. I believe it's Redeemer. It may be a Warlord, though. Let's check suffixes. It is Warlord, so crit multi is Warlord. You could do it that route too, or you could just use the essences that give you crit multi. So we'd have to regal this to look at essences, which is, I believe, Scorn. Yeah, Scorn. Scorn is a crit multi. So you could also use crit multi essences and try to get your int that way. You're going to be wanting to roll for int, maybe a resist or attack speed on the suffix, and then life on the prefix, and you could just do the prefixes like we did before. And that goes for both rings. Both rings are crafted like pretty much the same. You want the same stats on either. You're basically looking for an open prefix. If you can end up hitting flat fizz damage on your prefix, that's good as well. Maybe you want to buy a fractured ring with fractured flat fizz. That's a good choice to go with as well. All right, and the last piece we're going to go over is the amulet. So for our amulet, you will probably likely want an onyx amulet so that you can get a little bit more dex out as well, because the tattoos you can use with dex are really, really good. However, you could also go with an agate amulet. Agate, I don't know how to say that. You could go with that amulet as well. I ended up going with an onyx because that gave me my stat requirements. So we're going to jump into crafting that. And we want to do the exact same here. So we're going to make sure that we're getting a 16% or 16 base. And then we go into essences, and you can craft with whatever essence you feel necessary for your build. Maybe you want to do fizz to attacks and spam it until you get some good suffixes. You could also choose to just buy your amulet. That's fine too. Or you could go with Scorn. We could do crit multi. Scorn rolls pretty high on amulets, so that's definitely an option. But basically what you're looking for on the amulet is life. You want an open prefix. You want flat fizz to attacks. You want crit multi. You want attributes if you're missing out on some attributes, and you want resistances. So other than that, doesn't really matter what you get on your amulet. Those are basically your best choices. As far as the anoint goes, we want to be anointing for, let me drag over the POB here. We want to be anointing for sovereignty, which is 3 silver oils, and that will give us mana reservation efficiency and increased effective non-curse auras. So as you see, the amulet I have in the POB is just straight up resist. So with an open prefix and max life, the higher investment ones that I have are like one with crit multi instead, and then flat fizz on the prefix. So those are basically your options for amulet. And if you have a lot of money and you have the stat spread for it and you have your resistances covered, you could also go with an ashes as well. That will give you more mana res efficiency, which means you can swap out the helmet, and then that will also give you level to your gems and quality to your gems as well. So that's definitely another option to go with. All right, the next piece we're going to be taking a look at is the shields. And in this case, you probably want a shield with a decent suppress roll on it, unless you already have as much suppression as you need. So we'd be looking at like a supreme spike shield, a mirrored spike shield, polar spike shield, sovereign spike shield. Whatever gives us 5% chance to suppress is more than enough. So going into our crafting now, you're going to want to get one with a fractured spell suppression on it. So we'll go into suppress, and we'll just throw on a fractured spell suppress. You may have to drop to like a less desirable base or something like that, but honestly, the evasion and energy shield do not really matter on this anyway. So you just get whatever you can get at a relatively decent price. Now that we have our fractured suppress on there, all we're going to be doing is using essences again. So let's go ahead and just make this a rare. We'll go to our essences, and you can use any essence really. You can use the resistance essences. You can use a greed for max life. It doesn't really matter. All you're going to be rolling for is whatever resistance you're missing out on your other pieces. So let's say you need some cold res. We'll hit this with a few of these until we can get 2 acceptable suffixes, which these are fine. They're both relatively good. So, and we have an open prefix, so we just craft life and our shield is done. That is, there's not a whole lot to the shield. So you could choose to go with essences of greed instead. I put man on there for some reason. You could go with greed essences instead to get a higher life roll. It's totally up to you on whatever you want to spam more of. If you're okay for resistances, you might even want to consider stopping at like an attack speed roll. We can't actually force an attack speed roll because Zeal actually gives us stun and block recovery on shields, and we can't force a ailment avoidance, so you definitely want to get that on your boots instead. So in this case, maybe greed is the better option if you want to greed until you get something decent. It honestly doesn't really matter as long as your suffixes are pretty good. So once you hit good suffixes, you could just call it a day. So next up on the list, we're going to be wanting to craft a helmet. And the helmet is basically going to be used to fill out whatever stats we don't have elsewhere. So we're going to want a pig face bassinet. I would say maybe item level 85. You could also get away with an 84. Anything lower and you're going to be missing out on some T1 rolls. But for this one, we're going to want to be using essences again. And we're going to use Essence of Loathing because we're going to need some more preservation efficiency on our build. So we will use the second highest tier Loathing. And all we're doing here is trying to hit it and get some stats that we need. So this would actually be acceptable in our case since we are lacking some int, and we could get some int on our we would need less int on our jewellery. But to mess around a little bit more, let's hit it a few more times, and let's say we're looking for some resist stats here. Basically, we're trying to get like maybe 2 T1 resists, or optimally 2 T1 resists, but we don't even really need it. Maybe 1 T1 resist would be fine. If you're missing out on some accuracy, you could go with accuracy rating. I don't think you really need it, but let's say this is definitely more than acceptable here. So these suffixes are not bad. We have T2 fire res and T4 cold res, which are honestly fine for the build because we can fill a lot of those resists elsewhere. So as I mentioned before, helmet is really easy. We just craft on life on our prefixes and we're pretty much done. That would be acceptable, I think, especially for a budget. If you're doing a little bit more than a budget version, you might want to roll double T1 so you can free up some suffixes elsewhere. But in this case, we are happy with that. So now we need to work on our implicits. And the implicit on the helmet is really easy. We just need to use graders. So we're going to be using a grader acre to try to get preservation efficiency. So you'd basically just spam this. You want to get reservation efficiency. We'll just force it. Let's say we hit it. That's basically all we do for our eater. So we have increased reservation efficiency. 8% is great. And then for our searing, we're gonna again want to use greater, and we're just looking for reduced mana cost for attacks. There we go. We're done. That is all you need to do for your helmet. You don't really need anything special on a helmet. It's definitely the piece that you'd use as a filler piece to get whatever resist or attributes or whatever you need that you didn't get on other pieces. All right, and as for crafting clusters, honestly, I think you should just buy them. Like for the large at least, there isn't really any good ways to manipulate them. You could alt spam and then regal, but the amount of time you spend doing that, you could just farm out the currency that it would cost to buy them because they're not that expensive anyway. I think the only one that might be a little on the expensive side is the Blood Scent cluster, but Blood Scent and Martial Prowess together aren't really high value anyway. I think I bought mine for like one Divine or 100 Chaos or something, and that was like week two. So just buy those ones. For the smalls, you could definitely craft them yourself. For the life small, we're just looking for Feast of Flesh and whatever else. It doesn't really matter. For the res efficiency small, it would be Sublime Form or Destructive Aspect. So either one of those are you can just alt spam for those. They're really not rare at all. So pretty easy to craft that one yourself. And all you really need is a two passive small cluster. I believe item level higher than 50 or something like that. You could check Craft of Exile for that. Crafting those is really, really easy, but crafting the larges definitely isn't worth the time you spend doing it. So that's pretty much it for clusters, and that's it for crafting. So hopefully you have some good luck if you decide to tackle any of these crafting methods yourself. And if you have any questions regarding them, you can leave them in the comments or hop by my Discord or whatever it may be. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate you guys. Take it easy.